Well, welcome to Life Talks. I am here as the producer, Josh Brahm, with Pastor Dan, and Pastor Ben is still gone. I kind of thought he was going to be back by now, but apparently he's still gone.
Well, he's in a different place than he was last week.
See, it's just confusing. So we've decided kind of spontaneously because we have so many decades between us of vocational ministry.
You make that sound like you're the old guy. I'm the old guy.
I'm 40. I'm not longer a young guy.
I've been in the ministry that long, so let's sort this out.
I'm not saying it's equal number of decades. I'm just saying I started on worship ministry when I was 11. So I've got 3 decades of vocational ministry. True. That was, that's a whole nother story, but it's been a lot. And a lot of things happen when, flawed human creatures come together and try really hard to do good things for the kingdom and a bunch of people. Things go wrong, silly things happen, but also we learn a lot of lessons. I feel like I wish I knew back, 20 years ago what I know now from worship leading. And so we kind of wanted to share both, maybe just some fun stories, let people kind of get to find out some of the more embarrassing things that have happened to us.
To find out people in ministry actually have senses of humor.
That we have very big some of us, a few of us.
Some people are very humorless.
On this podcast, we have a big sense of humor about this stuff. But I think we've got some probably good lessons throughout there for us. So for people who are like actually doing vocational ministry or doing a lot of work with churches, I think we've got a couple of probably helpful thoughts. But let's start with just some funny. What are some of the funniest or most awkward or embarrassing things that are PG that we can say in the podcast?
So this is going to be a problem because, first of all, almost all of mine, some people are going to say, well, that's inappropriate. But then again, I'm a 13-year-old stuck in a 63-year-old body at times.
Right. Me too.
So I've left several on the drawing room floor, but a lot of them are misspeaking.
Yeah,
I've done that. And I'm a fast talker, and sometimes the reason I'm a fast talker is my brain operates on warp speed most of the time. You put a cup of espresso in me and I'm out of control. But often I'm trying to get all the words and they're spilling out. It's like they call it a word vomit sometimes.
Yep.
And
totally do this.
I do not pre-write my sermon so that I'm not reading it because I think that's boring and it makes me even longer than I am. So sometimes I'll get on a rant or whatever and I'll get excited. There's one time I was telling a story of I grew up in a small town, Norman Rockwell type community, and I was talking about the triumphal procession that's in 1 Corinthians, and I was comparing it to a parade, which it was of its kind. Right. And I talked about the parades in my hometown, and I mentioned, and I was on television. My services were televised because it was part of the mega church, and so I'm talking about, and they would take the winner of the local booty pageant.
Oh no!
And I was thinking, well, maybe nobody caught it. And then I looked down, all the teens kind of sat in one section. They all caught it.
They definitely got it.
Yeah, some of them were literally texting me as I was preaching. And I didn't know whether to go back and correct it and draw attention to it or just plow through it.
Right.
But I just plowed through it because we were on television and we didn't edit. It was a rough cut type of thing.
It was like
it wasn't live, but we just didn't have the facility to edit. So
you knew whatever you did was going to be on TV, so you better handle it
so I
correctly.
just hoped that most people weren't paying attention at that time. But I mean, I've heard several others. My favorite was there's an evangelist by name of, or he's a pastor, but he was an evangelist by name of Johnny Pope. Johnny Pope is just one of the best pulpiteers I've ever seen. He's old school, ranting and raving type of, but he's brilliant. He's the only person I ever knew who would quote Shakespeare, Chaucer, and Larry Curly and Moe in the same sermon. I mean, he's just brilliant. Just kept me stimulated the whole time, thinking deep thoughts and so forth. And one day he got up and he goes, "And we have to be aware that Satan has a plan for our defeat. You have to watch out for the fiery farts of Satan."
No.
But Johnny was also the type of person that he didn't let that go.
Yeah.
So he stopped and he goes, "Did you just hear what I said?" And then he said it again. And and there was a room full of pastors. There's probably 1,500 pastors in the room. So we just all, we hit the floor because we've all been there at some point.
Yeah. See, that makes it a way different audience because you don't have a bunch of people. You don't have to worry about all these people being like, "How dare this thing happen?" You've got to. Everyone has had this happen if we've had a microphone in front of us for long enough. We say.
Well, and you're a public speaker. Give us one of yours.
Man, see, that's when I was preparing for this, I was thinking so much about worship ministry, and so I know I have said so many. Okay, I'll tell you one of the worst things one of the worst things that's happened to me as a public speaker was on a recent trip. Just a perfect storm happened where never anything goes wrong on my talks, and then I show up at this thing and I had the hiccups so bad for it just over and over and over, and so
while you're speaking.
No, so I've arrived at this event that I'm the keynote speaker for, and I have an hour probably basically before I'm speaking, and I spent a good half of that out alone places trying every trick on the internet to get the hiccups to gone, and nothing was working. I basically had to tell the directors, I don't know what's going to happen, but it's possible that I'm going to get uncontrollable hiccups during this, and I don't even know what to tell you. What do you do if that happens?
There's nothing you can do except hick your way through it.
I got really, really lucky. And so then I thought I was fine, but then everyone talked to me afterward, and so I'm having to talk really loudly in this crowded room. Everyone want to come up. I've got a sermon to do the next morning. I lost my voice because everyone's talking to me the night before, and then I completely forgot about that the next morning until I'm on my way to the church, and I stopped by McDonald's to drive through, and I was like, "Can I have a McGriddle?" No. And I'm just like, "Oh no!" And had to get hot water on my way to this church, and then literally sit down with this poor pastor who handled this really graciously, but sit down in his office and text him, "I can't talk. I literally have no voice." And we basically I had to help him prep my sermon for him to deliver about half of, and then we did this kind of Q&A. Stuff definitely bad stuff has happened as a public speaker, but most of my stuff, when I'm thinking about vocational ministry and things, I've been thinking about music worship ministry and all the things that even recently, I had a really embarrassing moment here at Life, and also through a lot of the Germany concerts. We did this, the wonderful Christmas concert, Jason and the choir, we did this wonderful thing. And we had this gospel song that we did, "Ain't No Grave," that my wife sang. It's all of our favorites. This is a crowd favorite every time. And we got prepped for kind of these German audiences being very they might just kind of stare at you and try not to deal with that. And I just decided I'm going to try to use the magic of stage presence to try to get these people kind of moving. And the only way I can do that is if there's an instrument with me. I am totally frozen chosen if I'm out in the crowd, okay? But if you give me guitar, piano, or drums, then I can do that. And so I started getting really into it, and by the end of the tour, I was jumping off the stage doing yes, I never before had I done this, but I'm doing this. But then a lot of the times they couldn't hear the electric guitar that well. And so they're seeing this guy jumping around, and they can kind of hear the guitar, but not that well.
And why is he so excited?
Right. It's just
the weird bearded Americans just going charismatic on them.
This guy. Right. Exactly. That was frustrating to find, because I would have these monitors in my ears. Sounded amazing to me. But for a lot of other people, it was a more chill experience, and it would have.
Well, the good thing about that, though, is you don't have to face them again the next week, because it's you leave town. They're talking about you for years. You remember the time the Americans came and there was a weird guy jumping?
Next year, yeah. As long as I don't hear. Tell me about awkward things that have happened where you've had to decide whether or not, and you kind of did one, but we got to take out live TV because that's just another. But whether or not to address the weird thing that has happened on stage, or awkward or funny thing or whatever, whether or not to address that or kind of keep on going and pretend like it doesn't happen.
Yeah, I took public speaking in high school and college, and the rule of thumb is don't call attention to your mistakes. Most people don't notice them. The sign of a true professional is someone who can experience some kind of malfunction and be able to keep on going.
Right.
And even then, some people will look at it and say, well, was it really a mistake? He didn't seem to be rattled. And so that's the rule of thumb. But some of them are so egregious, so noticeable. And that's where I kind of let my humanity kick in.
Yes.
And by the way, I think this is an important parenting principle. When you do something stupid, or you make a mistake, admit it. Just stop and say, you know what? That didn't come out right, or I wasn't thinking clearly, or I was acting carnally in that moment. Will you please forgive me? Can we do a hard reset?
Yeah.
And I think, there are times, in humor situations that you just got to stop and you say, okay, let's all have this good old belly laugh here.
Right.
It was interesting. I've seen it handled well and seen it handled poorly. There was one time, this was before I was a pastor. I was a school principal, and I'm sitting in the audience of the church I was attending that I would eventually become the pastor of. And in those days, the pastor sat on the platform. So it was just, you remember that?
No.
This is like the 60s, 70s,
that is
80s.
The worst.
Yeah.
I am so sad for anyone who had to do that.
I did have to do that for a while. When I became a pastor, I stopped it. I made everybody quit.
Awkward.
Yeah. So you're sitting on, and there's like the chosen throne that you sit on, and then all of your little assistants sit on either side of you. It's very hierarchical and so forth. Yep. But so the assistant pastor got up and he was supposed to pray for the offering. Again, in those days we had a formal offering and you had a formal prayer before the offering. Right. And the guy gets up, and the guy, he was known for his love of food and it was apparent. So he gets up to pray for the offering and says, Lord, thank you for this food we're about to eat. Well, as soon as he said that, people just were laughing, and it took him a second to realize where he was and what he had said. And so there's no recovery from that.
Yeah.
You literally have to stop but there's also a deeper spiritual message in that is how often do we just go through the routine of worship, routine of prayer, routine of and forget our settings, surroundings, what we're saying or to whom we're speaking.
Yes.
And so that actually was kind of a teachable moment in the end, but at the time, the poor guy probably never lived it down. The other time where it was just one you couldn't ignore is we had some fat pastors on there. We probably had to reinforce the platform now I look back on it. But one of the pastors, he was hefty. Hefty. And the pastor was preaching and he fell asleep on the platform. That's not bad enough. He started snoring like a lumberjack.
This, I feel like it's going to happen in my future. I fall asleep so quickly sometimes. I feel like this is going to happen to me.
It was so bad that you could hear, the auditorium wasn't huge. She did maybe 300 or 400 people, and you could hear him in the back. He was snoring so loud. And finally, the pastor was not amused. He was not happy, and he walks over and punches him, with his fingertips on the shoulder to wake him up. Yeah, and
not a gracious way to respond, a very kind of publicly aggressive.
Yeah, it was, and he did it pretty rapidly, but everybody had heard it, everybody saw it, and then you see the look of horror on this guy's face. And so the rest of the sermon, we're all in our mind playing out what's going to happen after church when the pastor gets a hold of this guy. How's he going to dig out of that hole?
Oh my goodness.
So, but we're all human. People do doze off at times.
Right. So let's talk about so let's do the thought experiment version. And I've got one, but look, how should that have been handled? If everyone had been more kind of wise and mature and all of that.
I want to hear your thought on it. We had that happen in a college class one time, and we literally all got up and slipped out of the classroom and had the last person slam the door loud enough to wake him up, and I think he thought the rapture had occurred or something, because there he sat all by himself with,
That's an improvement.
with drool on his desk.
That's an
I don't know. I've never had that happen. I don't know what I would do. Do you have any suggestions?
So maybe I'll start with a story. This is kind of so many decisions I've made as a worship leader have all come from this one horrifying, humiliating moment at a really big church in Fresno one time. So we had, and this is super common. We were the worship team. We're there for 2 services. So naturally we don't listen to both sermons because we're not super, holy and everything. So it's no. And so we were, we would hang out the church would have this kind of, they had like a cafe area and the fellowship area in the fellowship hall, and there'd be a TV. And so the standard operating procedure, we do the first set, and then we literally have to actually go outside the building and walk around alongside the building.
Oh, wow, that's awkward.
Because we were like backstage, and there was no way to get from backstage to front stage without going outside. So we walk up the sidewalk, go through the front doors, and there's the cafe or whatever. So everything's going normal. The associate pastor, unusually, is preaching. I don't know if I'd ever seen him preach before. He was like 90. I was surprised that he was able to do it. Like I was legitimately impressed. And so he's preaching, and we're just hanging out. And he's maybe and they're using Planning Center. They had everything planned to the second. You know, we knew what was going to happen. It was going to be exactly 35-minute sermon. And then like 15 minutes into the sermon, this guy just starts praying. And like it took us as a team a moment to like triple take. Like he's like, what time is it?
He's finished.
He's finished in 10 or 15 minutes, and we're not like so. And I'm the piano guy, right?
Oh,
so
man.
I'm supposed to be there while he's playing pretty instrumental music in whatever key we're going to end up in for the next song, right? That's like this every church, right? And so I'm like, I have got to get on at that piano before he's done praying. So we literally ran, me and the drummer, for the quickest, as fast as we could around the perimeter of this church. Excuse me. We're on the perimeter of this church. We get up there. I get to the piano. The drummer gets to the drums, and I already know the key I need to be in. He's still praying, by the way. I'm playing quietly, and then I look at the worship leader who is backstage and has not come on stage. I'm like, why is no one else on stage right now? And he's giving me this sign, the stop playing sign, which I'm really confused by. So now I'm like looking over at the pastor, and he's still praying, and then he finally says amen and goes right back to his sermon.
The fake prayer.
Here's the fake out. He had just spontaneously decided to have like a long prayer in the middle of his sermon. Didn't tell any of us. And so I am playing piano during the middle of the sermon, and now he's back to preaching, and the lead pastor is in the front row staring at me like, what are you doing? Like, so confused. And so now it's like, so like I quietly fade out. And now the question is, what do I do? This is a 6 or 8 foot stage. There's 1,000 people in here or whatever. Everyone can see me, and the drummer's stuck here too. And I'm just staring at the back of this pastor who is not acknowledged at all what has just happened, that I was like scoring his prayer. And so I didn't feel like I could go. I just felt stuck. I didn't feel confident enough or whatever. And so I just sat at the piano, on the piano bench, staring at this guy, at the back of this guy's head for like 20 minutes.
Like it was all planned.
Like as if it was all like so awkward. And here's my thing. Here is how that should have been handled. That pastor should have said something like, you know what just happened, guys? Let's pause. Yeah. We have trained these musicians like Pavlov's dog. As soon as we're praying, they have a job to do, especially that guy who plays the piano. And so that was, I didn't tell them I was going to do this. I just felt the spirit lead or whatever, and so you guys, that was great job. My bad. You guys can go and like let us off the hook. And everyone would laugh about it.
Yeah.
And it would be fine.
Yeah.
It would have popped the awkward bubble.
Yeah.
And so it's like that would have been so much better if like let's all just express our humanity. Mistakes happen, and also don't treat the congregation like they're dumb. And Hollywood's been learning this too. Is more and more of the like kind of like writers are having to learn like, the best movies are not really basically written. It's like treat your audience as if they're smart, because a lot of them are, and like let them rise to that occasion. And so that's the way that I think as a worship leader. It's like if something weird just happened, if there's a cello on stage and there's never a cello on stage, just say something. Hey, we got a cello on stage, Yeah,
and giving people permission to laugh allows you to also recapture and it's preaching and teaching, it's art and it's science.
Yes.
But you if you lose somebody, if they're distracted, they're no longer listening to you, so you're wasting your time.
Yeah.
So you've got to figure out a way to get them all back on the page with you. And I think a lot of people forget how important that is.
Yes.
And because the thing is, if you think it's funny, the audience thinks it's funny. If you feel awkward, they probably feel awkward. So acknowledge the elephant in the room and deal with it. There have been times years ago, and I don't think I would do this today, but and this would happen in the mega church I was at. So, but we'd start worship, and I'd look around. Nobody's singing. People are talking. It's the first worship song.
Yeah.
And I literally would walk up to the platform, and I would say, "Let's stop." I'd stop the orchestra and say,
"Yes."
So
I'm totally for this.
Worship has begun.
Yep.
And so part of worship involves capturing our mind. So let's do a restart.
Yeah.
Let's pretend that this is the start. And so let's all put our minds together.
Yes.
And that's also part of leadership.
Yes.
And whether you're a parent or a pastor or a classroom teacher or whatever, you have to learn to read the room and address the room. And you also have to realize some things are out of your control. So there's a poor pastor, he can't help it because you were zealous or, but I would say, it would have been really cool. This would have freaked him out. If you'd been playing the organ instead of the piano, and you could have gone like all of a sudden turn it into a black church service, because black church service is the organist plays all during the pastor. It's like a silent movie, where they So and
I'm not
I've actually
heard
I've heard you play gospel style keyboard with the sound of an organ, and you're the best. So I think in a different lifetime,
lifetime, if I learn more jazz and things, let those guys know, the Corey Henrys of the world that are amazing. So okay, so we can kind of land this plane, I think, well. So let's go back to the sleeping pastor, and then a very quick, harder one to figure out how to handle, and then we can wrap this up and go to part 2. So here's going back to that pastor. In my mind, everyone has seen this guy sleep. Everyone should be feeling empathetic to him. Probably not, but everyone should be feeling empathetic to this poor guy, because sometimes we just can't help it. And so, me as a very empathetic Enneagram 9 people pleaser type person, I am just I want to help guide this person emotionally through this potentially humiliating experience, kind of a thing. So I'm gonna try to find what is going to be the best case scenario for this person, and if they're able to laugh at themselves, then that's going to. I'm going to probably. Okay, we got to wake them up. You're not going to get through the service with this dude snoring. So so don't pretend. It's even worse than abandon me at the piano. It's like. Kind of, Joshua Mobiloga, man, we have probably been working you way too hard as a volunteer. You find something. You spend 5 minutes, come up with one good line that's gonna land, and just help transition everything. So there's a thing that happened here at Life that happened to me that I don't even know if you knew what happened. I don't remember if you or Ben preaching, but this was at least a year ago. But I was backstage. We were waiting for someone to finish preaching so we could do the final song. I was very unusually playing electric guitar that week, filling in for someone. I think it was my first time playing electric guitar here. I'm waiting backstage. We're chilling out. And for whatever reason, the guitar strap that holds the guitar up.
I was preaching that day.
Okay, so this is what happened. So it just let loose. I wasn't holding the guitar. I think I was holding my phone or something, and it just, bam, dropped to the. It sounded like a cannon.
It sounded like somebody had dropped a bowling ball.
I basically had, functionally. It was a heavy guitar, and so. I mean, obviously, I'm just oh, no, because I'm the guy back there, by the way, that's always tiptoe backstage. Come on, guys, clomping around, and I dropped this guitar. And so this is the tricky one, is you're still preaching. So, I can't probably just go and be sorry, drop the guitar, go back.
Just open the curtain and say, whoops.
Right. What do you do? So that's the tricky one. Let's end on that. How... In the future, if I drop my guitar again while you're preaching, how should we handle this?
Well, because I did handle it this way, if I recall correctly, and it was absolutely perfect because of the way I am. Okay, so because I never make mistakes.
I didn't even know what happened because we can't hear hardly anything. So this will be good for me to know. What did you do?
Absolutely nothing. And here's why. Yeah. Because I knew I could hear it.
Yeah.
But there's a thick curtain between
Yes.
you and where that happened.
Intentionally.
Yeah. And so I didn't know whether it was a guitar or something had fallen over or somebody was, making plans to shoot me. But
Fainted backstage. Their head is
I realized this. I could hear it.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of like in an inset.
Yeah.
I didn't think nobody jumped, nobody gasped, nobody reacted to it. So I just ignored it. Now there was a time when I was, had a choir that would sit behind me and somebody passed out during the choir. Well, you just can't ignore that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would ask everybody to pray.
Yep.
And
That's totally what you did.
That one turned lengthy. Thankfully, we had a big theatrical curtain, so we just dropped the curtain while I prayed.
For privacy.
And then, but I could literally hear the paramedics come in the back and so forth. And it was very distracting. And there are times when you just plow through them and make it happen.
So here's my question, because then I wonder, and maybe that's right, but there's a part of me that is just like, how is anyone going to be able to concentrate on any sermon, no matter how amazing it is? At this point, is there just I sometimes in my mind just go back to we used to meet in tombs, in literal tombs, hiding, from the government who would want to kill us if we tried to work. And it's just I just imagine that sometimes we just life happens and we just how can we connect as a community in a moment like this? And I don't know exactly how to handle it because the privacy medical thing makes it complicated.
Yeah. And again, I think one thing's for sure is when something goes awry, people automatically want to look toward leadership to help them navigate it.
That's such a good point.
So you're not always going to navigate it the best way, but at least try to navigate it.
Yeah.
And about a year and a half ago, I think it was, we had the fire alarms go off in the church service. And false fire alarms are 99% of fire alarms, right?
Yeah.
But, at some point, then one of the ushers who did not follow protocol came in and said, all right, everybody evacuate. And at that point, bedlam ensued, and we actually did not finish the service and so forth. What would have been a better line of action is and we do have a protocol now, but from the stage, I would have said, okay, apparently we have a fire alarm.
Right.
I get a signal from the head of security. Yeah, we can't, it's not just a little thing. We can't figure out what it is. Everybody needs to evacuate. And then for me to ask everybody, give them instructions.
Yes.
That makes people feel secure.
Yes.
Make people feel like somebody's in charge.
Yes.
But the last thing you want is somebody or to ignore something that's obvious or apparent, or to have mixed signal, or the wrong person all of a sudden suddenly turns up in charge.
Yeah.
So, but again, some of that comes with experience. Some of it comes by doing the wrong thing, and then not to do that again, and you try the right thing.
And some of it is, having really great staff. I'll say, I just want to take a chance to compliment Ben here, because Ben, I'm sure even more now. Excuse me. I'm sure even more now, having gone through all this psychology training that he's done, but multiple times I've been here on the worship team when something has happened. I twice there's been some kind of a medical thing, and one was really distracting in the back. And Ben is so good at just at not doing the things that we're kind of saying not to do. It's just kind of stopping and just let's pray. Let's just pray for this person and kind of bring the community together, and is just so emotively attentive to kind of the room and what needs to happen. I've seen it handled badly a lot of times. Pastor Ben Rudolph is really, really great at that.
He is, and that's indicative of his character. His response often is, well, let's pray, and that helps.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
we're gonna have to do another prayer.
Well, I think the next one we may not use so many of the anecdotes. We may use some of them, but also just some lessons, leadership lessons, priority lessons, what it's like to be in ministry. So I think that's where we'll hit on our next episode.
Like it.
It's your turn to close it out. So,
boy, I have never done this before. Okay, so if you've got questions, email. What is it? Is it Pastor Dan? Who are we? Where are we emailing?
Okay, I'm going to close it out. Here we go.
Thank you. You do it.
And that's all the time we have for this episode of Life Talks. As always, thanks so much for listening to us. If you get a question that you'd love to see us address, why don't you address it to us at lifetalks@lifecharlotte.com. Share us on social media. If you would fill out a review, we'd appreciate that. But as always, thanks for joining us here at Life Talks.